What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Courtside Podcast here on the Basketball Network. As always, I'm Caleb, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Connor. Connor, college basketball season's just around the corner. How we feeling?
Well, you just hit it right on the nose. College basketball starts tomorrow, I believe. I'm excited. One of my favorite times of year, man. I love how in early college basketball you have these huge games being played. These non-conference games. Just an exciting time of year.
Exactly. I'm ready to get it going. I'm pretty sure as you're listening to this, it's going to be Monday, so you'll be listening to it the day college basketball starts. And because of that, obviously, that's the topic of today's show. So we'll be going over all of the college basketball conference, previewing each, kind of making some of our picks. Who do we think is going to win the league? You won't want to miss it. But before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Also, if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, make sure to give us a 5-star rating. Greatly appreciate that as well. But to jump into today's show, we're going to move to our transition 3, some of the top stories in the world of basketball. And because this show particular is talking about college basketball, these are going to be all around the world of college basketball. And the first big piece of news that we haven't touched on in any of our previous podcasts, it's the news that Tony Bennett is actually retiring from Virginia. So he's been the head coach at Virginia for a very long time, it seems. And this comes really late in the season, as you know, college basketball starts tomorrow, but when this piece of news broke, it was less than a month before college basketball had started. Just a crazy thing to have happened. So Connor, really want to get your thoughts. How are we feeling about this? What's kind of happened there at Virginia after?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough blow. Tony Bennett is a phenomenal coach. Won that championship back in 2019 in overtime against Texas Tech. I mean, I'm not sure if he ever came out and said what happened or not, but I mean, just always tough, when a coach like this retires. But, it definitely, if you're a player, that has to hurt, just a little, because I'm sure all of these guys came there to play for him specifically. He has a good track record of getting guys into the NBA. So yeah, it definitely has to hurt, the morale. I would say just a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And all of the pieces of news I've been seeing and reading really just pointed to the way that college basketball and honestly college athletics as a whole has been changing with NIL and all of that. Tony Bennett, if you've watched any of his teams, his best teams were the ones where, he's developed these players for 2, 3, 4 years and they're all, been in the system for a while. So it's tough to see him leave, but obviously I think just with the ever-changing landscape of college athletics and college basketball in particular, we've seen this with Coach K, Roy Williams, Jim Boeheim, just all of these legendary coaches, and they're all a lot older. But just seeing that, with the changing landscape of it, and even Nick Saban in football, some people just aren't finding the same joy that they previously were. So I believe that's the reasoning behind it, but really a tough blow for Virginia. They actually did have one guard, Jalen Worley, who transferred in this offseason from Florida State. He actually went ahead and entered the transfer portal right after Tony Bennett announced his retirement. So again, tough piece of news for Virginia, but hopefully that they're able to keep the majority of the team together and have a good season. I know one of their assistant coaches have been named the interim in the meantime. But again, just big news in the world of college basketball, and again, hoping for the best season for Virginia. But next piece of news is we have conference realignment. So a lot has been happening and the biggest story might be Gonzaga is joining the Pac-12 in basketball in 2026. So they're joining the likes of Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State. So really the Pac-12, I feel like, is trying to revive, the conference after losing everybody but 2, Washington State and Oregon State. And they've made a splash in terms of teams to get. These are some of the best non-Power 5 basketball teams, I would say, in schools coming out of the Mountain West. And then adding Gonzaga, obviously one of the premier teams in all of college basketball. And then also in conference realignment, Grand Canyon is actually going to be joining Mountain West. And them and UTEP will be joining the Mountain West in 2026. So again, the Mountain West losing like 4 teams, they're having to replenish and figure out who's going to be taking those spots. So a lot is moving there. and that's going to be a lot of talk and different things to come in terms of the world of college basketball and hoops. Connor, you have any thoughts on this one, or what do you like? What do you dislike about it?
I mean, I think I don't really have a whole lot to say about the Grand Canyon one. I mean, obviously the Mountain West had to replace, losing a bunch of schools with someone, which obviously Grand Canyon has, had a couple good seasons. But Gonzaga, I think this is a major L for if you're one of the Power Four conferences right now. Like how do you let one of the most winning programs over the last 10 years go to the Pac-12? Nothing against the Pac-12. But you're really telling me one of the Power Four conferences like the Big 12, ACC, and whatnot couldn't put together a better offer than what the Pac-12 put together. But on the other side, this is a huge get for the Pac-12. Obviously, they've been struggling. They've kind of been scraping together, a few of these other state schools. But I kind of wonder if Gonzaga not having a football program kind of hurt them joining a Power Four conference.
Yeah, that has to be it. I mean, we've heard the rumors about Big 12 trying to go out and get Gonzaga recently, and I think you hit it right on the head. No football program really hurts because in the world of college athletics, that's where the majority of the money is. So tough get for all the other teams, but obviously a big win for Pac-12 and big win for Gonzaga. They were desperately needing to get out of the WCC to gain more respect, but also, increase that revenue that they can get from their conference. So I think it's a good win for them and obviously exciting to see.
Definitely a good win, because obviously you're not playing in the Big 12 or SEC, but they're playing better teams overall now than they have been, which I think is important, because that's always been the biggest knock on them is oh yeah, they went 33-1 every season, but it's who really did they play,
Exactly. So I'm excited for it. Obviously, we have to wait 2 more seasons because it won't start until 2026, but everybody better get ready for that. Last piece of news for the Transition 3. We have a bunch of recruiting updates. I'm quickly going to go through them, and then we'll just quickly talk about each. So Kian Anthony, so Carmelo Anthony's son, is actually set to commit on November 15th. So he's a 4-star prospect and the number 28 overall recruit in 2025, and he's picking between Syracuse, USC, and Auburn. So most notable, obviously, being Syracuse, where his father Carmelo played. Then we had Isaiah Dennis, a 4-star prospect, number 62 overall player in 2025. He committed to UNC. Acaden Lewis commits to Kentucky, and then Shelton Henderson just committed recently to Duke, which is a 5-star recruit. So obviously Duke just continues to bolster that lineup, joining the Boozer twins. And then the last piece of news was Ace Flagg. So the twin brother of Cooper Flagg has committed to play at the University of Maine. That's actually where the Flagg brothers are from. He's a 3-star recruit, and just a good reminder that Cooper and Ace are twin brothers. So Ace Flagg actually is a year behind because Cooper reclassified a year up. So he will be playing college basketball as a 17-year-old to start the season this year. But brother Ace Flagg will be playing college hoops next season at the University of Maine. I feel like the main one we might want to quickly touch base on is, Kian Anthony, Carmelo Anthony's son. I think it'd be really cool to see him out at Syracuse, playing in the, kind of following the footsteps of his father.
I mean,
what are you thinking though?
I mean, I'm sure my thought is, and I'm sure you probably have a similar thought as the rest of the country does, he's probably going to Syracuse, like the Boozer twins, they were fielding, 2 other offers, but it seemed like there was no doubt they were following in their father's footsteps, so I'm assuming that's probably what's going to happen again. But you never know, some sons like to be I don't want to, be in my father's shadow. But obviously there are, later generations, who do follow in their father's footsteps. So that's what I'm expecting. But I will say him being under Bruce Pearl would be a pretty cool thing to see.
Yeah. And talk about just complete opposite teams in terms of location. You got Syracuse, obviously, up in New York, New Jersey, USC out in Southern California, and then Auburn down in Alabama. I mean, he's looking all over the country, so it'll be exciting to see where he ends up. But I agree. I'm expecting Syracuse to to be the place where he will play his college basketball next season. And then the last piece of news, we got an extra one for you. Cooper Flagg has just signed an NIL deal with Gatorade, becoming the first men's college basketball player to sign with Gatorade. Obviously, really cool get for Cooper. I feel like he is signing NIL deals left and right and making lots and lots of money off of it. But seeing this dude play in the preseason so far, he's looked phenomenal. Definitely well-deserved. But couldn't think of a better person for this to go to in terms of marketability, because it seems like this season is the season of Cooper Flagg.
I mean, yeah, everyone wants a piece of Cooper Flagg right now. I mean, you can't blame him. 17-year-old reclassified, still the projected number one pick. As a 17-year-old, pretty crazy. So, yeah, I mean, I guess, if you're Cooper Flagg, of course, you're going to be the first male first male college basketball player to sign with Gatorade. So huge deal, I think, on both sides, and it seems like a pretty good partnership from the outside. So
exactly. All right, well, we'll go ahead and jump into the main part of our show. We're going to be going through each of the major college basketball conferences. So your Power Four, but also the Big East, and maybe talking a little bit about Gonzaga at the end of the show to go through each, talking about who's the top dogs in each of the conference, who we expect to win, and what our thoughts are on all of the different teams. So quickly, just a quick rundown on all the teams. In the AP Top 25, there are 6 conferences represented. So we have all of the 5 major conferences, as well as the WCC with Gonzaga. But I'm going to quickly run down the list. So we got the Big 12 with 6 teams in the top 25, 5 in the top 10. The SEC had 9 teams in the top 25 with only 1 in the top 10. Big 10 with 4, ACC with 2, and Big East with 3. And for the first conference, we're going to go over to the Big 12. This conference has been the best college basketball conference in the past 5, maybe even 10 years, it seems like, and is an absolute gauntlet night in and night out. Doesn't matter if you're playing a team that's ranked or unranked, you better watch out and you better be ready to go. So we're going to be going through and talking about each of our teams that we think have a good chance of winning. I feel like the first one we want to touch on is Kansas. Connor, what's your thoughts on Kansas? How are we feeling? The AP number 1 team in the preseason.
I mean, it's kind of hard, not to be excited about this team. I feel like we've talked about them a little, or like a month or maybe 2 months ago. But, they're returning both their big men in Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams, who, I mean, that's almost 30 points of scoring right there, which is crazy. Obviously, they're both tremendous rebounders as well. But then also, we talked about how they have some crazy scoring transfers coming in, so obviously, and then you factor in Bill Self, being one of the best coaches, in college basketball history. I think you got a pretty scary team here. Not that Kansas, is never not scary, but it's just, I don't know. It seems like they had a lot of their guards leave, a lot of scoring leave. But then you look at them and you're like, oh, well, they returned a lot of scoring and then they brought in a lot of scoring. So it's just I think this team might give defenses some nightmares.
Yeah, Bill Self knows what he's doing. So never going to doubt the Kansas Jayhawks and Bill Self. Lose big production between Kevin McCullough and Johnny Furphy, but obviously replace that with a number of transfers, probably the best or one of the best transfer classes in all of college basketball, adding multiple different double-digit scorers and David Coy, Zeke Mayo, AJ Storr, and Rylan Griffin. The one hesitancy I have with this team is it's going to go as far as Hunter Dickinson can take them. He's one of the best big men in all of college basketball. Can he continue to lead this team in the right direction? I feel like last season when there were a bunch of injuries that happened, Kevin McCullough was hurt, DeJuan Harris battled some injuries, and so did Hunter Dickinson. But when Hunter Dickinson is on the floor, he's a game changer. So it's really going to be how far can he take this team along with all of the support players that he's got beside him. The one person I do want to mention, AJ Store, I think he might be the transfer player of the year in the Big 12 this season. So last season he was at Wisconsin and averaged just shy of 17 points per game. But he has looked absolutely incredible last season and looked great in their preseason games as well. So I expect him to have some big games. So I think this team is well warranted at the number one spot. If you look at them on any of the different rankings that people are putting out, they're definitely top 5, majority of the time in top 3. But just have a lot of dudes that can play well.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it, this team will go as Hunter Dickinson goes. Obviously KJ Adams filled in as best as he could last year, but, at times they were just lacking that big man, down low. KJ Adams is not the tallest guy out there, but we talked about how he's an athletic freak, crazy hops, really good defender as well. But it's just like when Hunter Dickinson, is in, he just gives this offense just a whole nother dynamic, especially because, he extended his shot to the 3-point. He can actually knock down open threes now, which is absolutely huge. But it's also just like there was no one who could stop him down low. He's just a big guy. He has some good moves down low. Just like, what are you going to do? And then we literally just talked about how a lot of these coaches, with the new, transfers, NIL, how they were kind of like, I don't want to deal with it. Bill Self is one of those coaches who adjusted and embraced it. He took Kevin McCullough from Texas Tech, 18-point per game scorer last year. And then obviously AJ Store, the guy from Northern Illinois, Zeke Mayo, he's like found those guys in the transfers, and brought them in. And obviously Kevin McCullough made a huge impact last year. So I'm kind of expecting, that from these transfers as well. I think he's done a great job at embracing the change rather than trying to resist it, as we've seen a lot of these kind of like coaches who were there before NIL and transfer portal, they kind of get phased out or they just retire.
Yeah. I think Bill Self really addressed Kansas's biggest issue from last year in this offseason, and that was shooting. They had basically 5 guys that could play, and only a couple of them could shoot. And then that was about the team. Like, there was no bench, and I think they really got burned with some of their transfer portal additions last season. Mainly Nick Timberlake was coming in as being, this heralded transfer portal guy and only averaged 5 points last year. And so they went out and they got dudes that they know can shoot. So I think they're going to be a great team, but they got a lot of tough matchups as well. So next team we got is the Houston Cougars, coming out at number 4 in the preseason AP poll from the voters. And they are looking great. The main loss that the Houston Cougars took was Jamal Shead, obviously going off to the NBA draft. He was their leader. He was the point guard, the one that took control of the games at the end of it. But they're returning just about everyone else. LJ Cryer, the sharpshooter, Emmanuel Sharp, which was a bright spot last year for them as a freshman. But came in and got some big transfers. So they got Mios Uzan from Oklahoma, and then also brought in a lot of incoming freshmen, mainly Mercy Miller, number 68 in the ESPN 100. But at the end of the day, this is just a Kelvin Sampson team, and they're going to defend, they're going to play hard, and they're going to play well. I mean, it's a well-coached team, and one thing to note is they are ranked number 1 in Ken Pomeroy's college basketball rankings coming into the preseason, and looking kind of a lot better than just about every other team as well there. So this is going to be a tough battle for the Kansas Jayhawks to go up against, but Houston's looking dangerous as they have been the past couple of seasons.
Yeah. And obviously we know LJ Cryer is going to shoot 12 threes a game. Whether he hits at a good rate or not kind of fluctuates. But obviously I think to probably rely on him, a little more. But, a guy that's probably going to have to step up, which, I mean, he played well last year, is Emmanuel Sharp. He definitely had some huge moments for them last year. But, Jamal Shead was definitely that leader on that team. I think that was, not in question about who the leader on that team was. So between like Cryer and Sharp, I'm a little interested to see, who really takes the alpha dog if that makes sense, whose team this is. Because obviously LJ Cryer is your leading scorer, but that doesn't necessarily mean, he's, their guy on that team. So I'm a little interested on that. But if we know Kelvin Sampson will have this team ready, just seems ever since he's been there, this team has competed hard. Obviously, they've fallen short in the tournament. But, they moved to the Big 12 last year and they won 30-plus games, so definitely a team to watch out for.
Yeah, and I will say last season, I think they win that game in the NCAA tournament if Jamal Shead doesn't get hurt in the first
100%.
half. That was, they lost basically their floor general on the court, and that's where it comes into play for this season. Who's going to be that floor general? That's why they brought in Milos Uzan from Oklahoma. He was kind of Oklahoma's main point guard last season, so I'm really hoping to see if he can run the offense. Probably not as well as Jamal Shead did, because Jamal Shead was just a great talent. But if he can run the offense well enough to where LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp can get to their spots and obviously knock down those shots. But when you got Kelvin Sampson at the head of it, I think they're going to be ready to go and obviously very well coached. And talk about another well-coached team that we've had in the Big 12 as of recently, Iowa State. TJ Alsenberger has this team rolling. And they did not lose much. Biggest name that they lost was Trey King and Robert Jones. Those were two of their rotation pieces, but they brought back everyone else, as well as adding in a plethora of transfers. You got Tamin Lipsey, one of the best point guards in all of the nation, Keyshawn Gilbert, and then the sharpshooter Milan Momcilovic. He was looking great last season, and then brought in a bunch of transfers, 4 that are all scored and looks to score in the double figures of last season at their former teams. So I think this team is going to get ready to go, and they brought in some scary transfers as well.
Yeah. They probably have, one of the best backcourts in the country. Gilbert and Lipsey. I feel like kind of last year that they would trade off, like who would take over the games. It seemed like a one night Lipsey would be on fire and have 20 points. And then the next night Gilbert would have, 25 points. But I think you hit it. They're a very well coached team. Playing in the Big 12, you kind of have to be, or you're going to fall behind really quick and you're going to have to make up a lot of ground. As good as Iowa State always is, I feel like no one was expecting too much from them last year, but they were like a top 10 team last year and they were playing really well. Obviously, once again, they lost in the tournament, but they were a team that people were expecting to make a deep run, and I think they probably have those expectations starting from the jump this year, just because they returned so much from last year. They returned their top 4 scorers. Anytime that happens, you're typically in a pretty good spot to start the season.
Exactly. And I think you hit it right on the head talking about, some nights it would be Keyshawn Gilbert, some nights it would be Tamin Lipsey. this team is one of those teams where you truly don't know who's going to go off on what night, and everyone can. They had 4 different people that averaged in double figures, followed by Trey King with 9 points per game, and Robert Jones last season was 7.7 points per game. So it was really just scoring by committee, and it didn't matter whose night it was. They were going to get the ball in the hot hand. But then their defense, TJ Altenberger always has this team playing great defense, and that's the scariest part about them, is because their defense leads to so many easy buckets, and I can just see it happening again. One of the transfers I want to note, Joshua Jefferson, coming from St. Mary's. Great defender, 6'9" forward from St. Mary's. They're just really scary on the defensive end, and it can be an opponent's nightmare each and every night.
And he's coming from a program that is also well coached, so he knows, how to work hard. He knows what it takes. Obviously, St. Mary's has been really good the past couple of years, so I like the fit just because, we know he's going to work hard and put in the effort.
Exactly. And I really want to switch gears to another team in the Big 12, but we're not going to be talking about offense a whole lot. We're going to be talking defense a whole lot. We're going to be talking a lot about offense, and that's Scott Drew's Baylor Bears. So if you don't remember the offseason, there was a rumor Scott Drew might be going to Kentucky, but he said no to that. He wants to stay in Waco, Texas, and coach the Baylor Bears. And there was a lot of movement on this roster. 4 of their main rotation pieces left this offseason in Jacoby Walter, Ray J. Dennis, Jalen Bridges, and Yves Missi. But then they brought in a lot of great transfers, most notably Jeremy Roach, the starting point guard at Duke last season, and then also Norchad Omier, the rebounding machine out of Miami. And then Scott Drew always brings in one of those top 10 freshmen. And this year he's got a great one in VJ Edgecombe. And then obviously return Langston Love, Jaden Nunn, and Josh Ojawanu. This team is looking scary good. And I think they could be not necessarily a dark horse because a lot of people have them as one of the best teams in the Big 12 and obviously rated 8th in the AP preseason poll. But I feel like a lot of teams are talking all about Kansas, Houston, or Iowa State. Don't sleep on the Baylor Bears because they're going to be great this year.
I mean, like, those first 3 teams we talked about were top 5, right, in the preseason polls. Baylor's number 8. They're by no means a bad team. Obviously, it sucks being in a stacked conference like this, but Baylor doesn't shy away. But, I think, like you said, they're an offensive team. They have been ever since Scott Drew has been there. They're going to shoot a lot of threes. We definitely saw some nights last year where they went cold, definitely hurt them. But I like Jeremy Roach. He's actually my pick to be transfer of the year in the Big 12. Obviously, scoring 14 points per game at Duke, we know how stacked Duke's roster typically is every year. But yeah, no, I've always been a big fan of Jeremy Roach. I think he's a really good get for Baylor. Interested to see if he can develop his 3-point shot, because he hasn't been historically the most efficient. He definitely has improved from year to year. But I'm interested to see if he can, just stay consistent the whole season. But I'm excited for VJ Edgecombe, dude. Like the number 3 recruit coming in. Obviously they lost a lot of scoring. Jacoby Walter, Ray J. Dennis, Jalen Bridges, and Yves Missi. What is that? Like almost 50 points a game right there between those guys. They have a lot of shoes to fill. So I'm interested to see what their rotations are going to be like this coming season.
Yeah, I like what you said about Jeremy Roach because I've been seeing this a lot with Scott Drew recently, and it's kind of been interesting to me. So Scott Drew always goes out, and I feel like he kind of has a recipe for success in terms of the transfer portal on his team as of recently, and especially the past 3 seasons. So he goes out, gets a top 10, top 20 recruit, an incoming freshman, and then also brings in a veteran point guard to play alongside them. So we saw that with Keontae George and Adam Flagler. And then last year we saw that with Jacoby Walter and Ray J. Dennis. And then this year we're going to see that with VJ Edgecombe and Jeremy Roach. I think this year's combination of VJ Edgecombe and Jeremy Roach is going to be better than either of the past 2 combinations of a veteran point guard with, a starting caliber wing and an incoming freshman. Edgecombe is very, very good. And if it wasn't for Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey, he would be the most hyped freshman we have this season, obviously coming in at number 3 in the ESPN 100. He's going to surprise some people, and he's my pick for freshman of the year in the Big 12. And then I like what you said about Jeremy Roach. He's going to be in the running for transfer player of the year for the Big 12 as well. Just a solid point guard out of Duke. And then don't sleep on Norchad Omier. This guy is an absolute beast in the paint. I mean, he averaged 17 points per game last year at Miami, followed by 10 rebounds per game. So averaged a double-double, just bringing in that workhorse mentality. And then you obviously have the likes of Langston Love and Jaden Nunn out there on the perimeter as well. I think this team's going to be deep, and Scott Drew's going to have them ready to go. And shout out to Scott Drew for scheduling some great games at the very beginning of the season. We'll talk about that at the end of the year. But Scott Drew knows how to get college basketball kicked off with some great games, and we really appreciate it. All right, sir. Moving on. Arizona coming in at
another top 10 team, by the way.
Another top 10 team. 5 of the top 10 are in the Big 12. Just talk about an absolutely stacked conference, especially at the top. We got Arizona. It's the return of Caleb Love. Lost a lot, though, with 4 of the other starters all departing out of Arizona, but return Caleb Love and then return the likes of Jaden Bradley and KJ Lewis, who were bright spots in the NCAA tournament last season. This team has a lot of change, but I think Tommy Lloyd's going to have them right. Connor, what are we thinking with Arizona? Are you liking this team and the way they're looking?
I mean, I think Caleb Love will probably, be a candidate for Player of the Year. Not saying he'll win it or anything, but they did lose like 45 points a game from their other four guys. But with that being said, obviously they did bring a couple high scores coming in. I personally like Trey Townsend from Oakland. Not the biggest school, but I think they have definitely been in the tournament, recently. But yeah, he averaged 17 points per game there, and then you got Anthony Del Orso from Campbell, 20 points a game over there. Interested if, I'm sure they will pick up some scoring, but, interested to see how much they will. But yeah, obviously I think you also have Carter Bryant, the number 19 recruit incoming. To me, it's always interesting, like outside of the top 15 freshmen, like which ones actually get to play a whole lot or not. Just because obviously like Kentucky was known for, and obviously Duke now is known for playing their freshmen a lot. But I feel like if you look outside of that, freshmen typically don't get, significant minutes. Which, sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but definitely an interesting piece, I think, to consider factoring in.
Yeah. The two transfers you mentioned are obviously the two most notable one. Anthony Del Orso is a 6'6" guard out of Campbell, averaging 20 points per game, as you mentioned, and also shooting around 40% from three. I think he's going to be a big help to Caleb Love. And then Trey Townsend, he was out there with Jack Golke, if everyone remembers Oakland's legendary run last season. I feel like everybody remembers Jack Golke for all the threes, but the guy that was banging down low and actually scoring more points than Jack Golke was Trey Townsend. Had an amazing run with Oakland last season, so he's going to be a big help for them.
Also, shot 37% from three, I think, right? Last season too, so he can stretch the floor a little.
Yeah, he's a little bit undersized, though, because he's a 6'6" forward, but, I mean, he doesn't play like it. He plays like he's 6'8" or 6'9".
Physical.
But this team is going to go kind of like we said, Hunter Dickinson and Kansas. This team's going to go as far as Caleb Love takes him. And it's really going to be, is Caleb Love on this season or is Caleb Love off this season? Because he might be the most streaky player in all of college basketball. I mean, he can score 10 really quick, or he can maybe just not even score 10 in the game. It all depends on how his game's going. So he's going to be in the running for Player of the Year, but I think they got a lot of good pieces. The one thing that I think Arizona is going to be missing is, they do have Trey Townsend, but where else are we going to find production in the front court? Because they lost a lot with Umar Ballo and Keishad Johnson both transferring out this season.
Yeah. No, I mean, they definitely have a big hole there at the big man. So, yeah, no, I think you hit it. Who are they going to put there? Who are they going to learn to rely on? But, Arizona seems to be always one of those teams, that wins 25 to 30 games every year. But I will say, being in the Big 12 this year, I think they'll be an interesting team to watch.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, we got a few more teams we're going to quickly go over. The last team that's ranked for the Big 12 is Cincinnati. They actually are coming in at number 20 in the top 25. They return a lot, honestly, didn't lose much, and then brought in some good transfers, specifically Connor Hickman from Bradley, and then Dylan Mitchell, who played at Texas last season. They look to have a loaded roster. I think just the experience and the veteran leadership on this team is going to help a lot when you are able to keep the majority of your team together. Wes Miller had them playing well last season and expecting a lot more. A lot of the college basketball analysts are really high on Cincinnati, so wouldn't be surprised to see them at the top of near the top of the Big 12 this season. Do you have anything to add on Cincinnati?
I mean, I feel like I'm kind of expecting a lot out of Dylan Mitchell. He's a good player. He's been overshadowed at Texas. It seems like ever since he got there by other players. So I'm a little interested to see if maybe he's on a less high profile team. If maybe he can show off a little more of what he can do.
Yeah, I like the Dylan Mitchell pickup. I think it was really big for Cincinnati, and it's going to help them a lot this season. And then the last teams I just want to mention: Texas Tech, K-State, and BYU. Those are all three on my radar for teams that could have a really good season. I'm expecting them to at least make the NCAA tournament, but are not currently ranked in the AP top 25 in the preseason. But
All
really,
three of them, I think, got votes though. So I
yes.
mean, obviously they're expected to at least be competing. But yeah, no.
Yeah, and I think Arizona State also received some votes as
Hmm.
well. So obviously a lot of Big 12 representation in the top 25. But if you had to pick one, Connor, who do you think is going to be winning the Big 12 this season?
Man, this is so hard to choose. I think to me, there's three teams that stick out above the rest, and that's those first three we talked about. Obviously, they're all in the top five. Um, but I think I might have to go with Houston. Have to go with my hometown. You know, I like the way they play. I like Kelvin Sampson. Think he's a great coach. Definitely think they can topple down Kansas though atop the Big 12 rankings.
Yep. I like Houston, but I'm gonna have to go with Kansas. I think that transfer class is, second to none in all of college basketball this season, and I think it's gonna help them a lot in the upcoming year. But then I'm gonna say Kansas to win the regular season, but I'm actually gonna say Baylor to win the Big 12 tournament.
Mm.
I think Baylor is one of those teams that can get streaky and put a lot of games together and,
I
and
will.
make a run.
Yeah, I will say I feel like typically those streaky teams can be the ones to win those the conference championship just because you only need 4 or 5 games of hot shooting, and I feel like we've definitely seen that before many times. So
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on to our next conference, we have the SEC, and
mm.
the SEC has put a lot of work into their basketball. I mean, if you think
Uh,
about the SEC 5 years ago, I wouldn't have put many at the top, but now we got nine
Kentucky, and that's it.
SEC. Yeah, now we got nine SEC teams ranked in the top 25, and only one in the top 10, and I can say that is not Kentucky, which is kind of surprising. But obviously, if you watched last season at all, you know who it is. It is the Alabama Crimson Tide. So not only is this team good at football, they're also good at basketball now. So ranked number 2 in the AP preseason poll. And the main reason why is because of the man, the myth, Mark Sears returning. There was some questions on whether or not Mark Sears was going to go into the NBA draft or if he's going to make it back to Alabama, and he decided to stay. But obviously returns alongside Grant Nelson and Latrell Wrightsell Jr. But Alabama had themselves a field day in the transfer portal and in recruiting, bringing in Chris Youngblood from South Florida, Houston Mallett from Pepperdine, the big man Clifford Omarui from Rutgers, and even bringing in Auburn's star freshman from last year, Aiden Holloway. So Holloway deciding to go to the in-state rival Alabama from Auburn. And then they also bring in the number 11, 21, 30, and 62 recruits in the ESPN Top 100 this year in freshmen. They're looking good. And I will say they looked really good in their preseason games as well. I think Alabama is looking great this season and should be a force to be reckoned with in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that they might legit shoot 50 to 63s a game. They love to chunk it from deep. I think it is going to be just a little interesting, with Aaron Estrada and Rylan Griffin, both departing. Estrada averaged 13 points a game. Rylan Griffin averaged 11 per game. So obviously they're going to have a little slack to pick up. But honestly, I really like the Clifford Omarui transfer from. I feel like he had some really high expectations coming into college. Obviously, not played horrible. I think he's played pretty well. But I'm interested to see what he can do with one of the best players in the country next to him. I'm hopefully he can blossom into the player. I think people expected him to be a little more. But yeah, no, I think they're favorites in the SEC for a reason. Obviously, big reason is going to be Mark Sears. Yeah, I think Alabama might be a little bit more excited about their basketball than they are about football right now.
Yeah, and there's a good reason why Omarui really came in to help them on the defensive end because he is just like a defensive stopper. And if you know anything about Alabama, they love to run and score a lot, but the defensive side of things, they're not the best. So
Gave
bringing
up a
in,
lot.
yes, so bringing in a lot, but they still got the offense going in both of their preseason games, scored 90 plus points, and will shoot the most threes or just about the most threes in all of college basketball this season. If you like watching a high scoring, high octane offense, make sure to tune into Alabama's games because they're always like that. So we know what Mark Sears is going to give you. We know what Omarui is going to give you. I think this year it's going to be all about Grant Nelson. He has shown flashes of being phenomenal at Alabama last season, specifically in the NCAA tournament, but he's also shown games where it's like, where are you at? So I think he's going to be one of the key pieces to step up. You know, when you don't have the best performance from Mark Sears, can he take some of the load off on the offensive end? And I think that's going to be the biggest question mark for Alabama, but they're going to be great this season, and they're definitely number 2 for a reason.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think you hit it right on the head. Like outside of Mark Sears, who's someone who can keep them afloat when Mark Sears, needs to come out, because I feel like we see it so often where the star player gets subbed out and the offense just like, what happened?
Exactly.
Definitely going to be key for them. Mark Sears might have to be playing 40 minutes a game.
Yep. Well, next we got Auburn. So Alabama's in-state rival. They had a lot of movement, but the biggest news for Auburn was that Janiah Broome decided to stay in Auburn. And then they also returned Chad Baker Mazzara, Denver Jones, Dylan Cardwell, and then bring in the likes of JP Pegues, Miles Kelly, and then Tahad Pettiford as a freshman as well. I'm not as high as the AP voters on Auburn this season, to be completely honest. So they're coming in at the 11th team in the nation. I think there's some other SEC teams I would have put ahead of them. But obviously Bruce Pearl has had this team going and playing really well in previous seasons and as of recently. So would expect them to definitely be in contention for the SEC. Just don't know if I would have put them as high as the 11th ranked team and the number 2 team in the SEC.
Yeah, I know. I think the 2, 3, and 4 teams in the SEC, I think voters and the writers are pretty interchangeable on right there. Everyone has their own opinions or whatnot. But I think one thing that you cannot deny is Bruce Pearl. I think that's probably a huge reason. He's a phenomenal coach. I think them getting Broome back was huge. I think if they didn't get him back, I think people might be viewing Auburn just a little bit differently. Because if he doesn't come back, who were they going to replace him with? Obviously, their offseason might have looked a little bit differently, if they had to replace him. But, he did come back and, obviously when you return your leading scorer, that's huge, especially in the NIL era. But I think I'm kind of with you that I might put a different team here at the second spot. But I will say I don't hate them being second in the SEC.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're definitely going to be in the top half, probably top 5. Just some of these other teams. And so the next team we'll talk about is Tennessee at number 12. I feel like, honestly, I'm kind of low on Tennessee as well. They're not necessarily where I would put them at 3 either, but I just feel like there's a lot of these teams that are pretty interchangeable, and that's why they're ranked right around each other in the AP poll. But Tennessee, biggest question for them is who's going to replace Dalton Connect? I mean, a 22 points per game scorer last year for you, basically did it all for them in the offensive end. Seemed like at times everyone else was just playing defense. Who's going to replace him?
And then they also lost Jonas Adu, who was, 11.5 points a game. It was like their top scorer returning is Ziegler, 11.8 points per game. So I think you hit that on the head. Who is going to be scoring the points for this team? Are they going to have games like 30 to 15? It kind of seems like the direction they might be heading. But yeah, so offense will definitely look interesting for Tennessee, as I feel like it typically does.
Yes, for sure. Most notably, though, they brought in Chaz Lanier. That was kind of one of the most sought after portal guys from North Florida. Had a great season last year. He averaged 20 points per game, but it's like you did that in North Florida. Can you do that in the SEC? We'll see. They're obviously Tennessee's going to be great at defense, but good to know that in their first exhibition game, they only scored 62 points. So I'm expecting, a lower scoring team there and going to play a lot of close games. But that's how Rick Barnes in Tennessee wants it. I mean, that's how they've been doing in seasons past, and it seems to be working. But to get them over that hump, they're going to have to be able to score more points. I'm just not sure where that's going to come from. But
for sure.
Yeah. But talk about, go ahead.
I was just going to say, man, dude, Rick Barnes likes his defense. It seems year in and year out, they are one of the best defensive teams in the nation. And, I think, did they win the SEC championship last year in the tournament? I can't remember if that was last year or the year before, but they won that on their defense, So, anyways.
Defense travels, though. That's the one thing, right? Defense travels, and so we know they're going to have that. But a team that's more offensive focused, that's the Texas A&M Aggies, and this would actually be the team that I would have above Tennessee and Auburn. So they are bringing back Wade Taylor, the fourth 19.1 per game scorer last season, and then brought in Zurich Phelps from SMU, who looked phenomenal last year. I am very excited for this team. Didn't lose a whole lot. They lost Tyrese Radford and Julius Marble, but I think with the pieces that they have right now, they got a lot of guys that can pick up the slack there. I like what I see from this team. I think they're going to be scoring a lot of points this season.
Yeah. I mean, and I will say, I'm not going to say that they didn't lose nothing, because Tyrese Radford was 16.5 points, and obviously Julius Marble only 9 points per game. But if you watch them, like, he was one of their key players, on both ends. So definitely, I think 2 holes that they have to fill. But I mean, I think you did say it, like, they have those pieces to plug in those holes. It's just matter of fact if Buzz Williams can plug the holes. I feel like sometimes we're like, oh, they brought in players to replace them, and then it seems like, oh, but they're not fitting, for some reason. And Texas A&M always seems to be a team that starts off slow in the season, and then for some reason they start conference play, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like, where the heck did this team come from? It seems like their offense just cannot put it together until halfway through the season. But I mean, I think you said Wade Taylor the fourth, 19 point per game scorer. Obviously, we know he will get his shots up no matter what. He might shoot 30 times a game. But I will say, I think it's going to be interesting. Are you going to rely on Phelps to become your second leading scorer now, or is it going to be one of these other dudes, like Henry Coleman, to step up and score more points per game?
Yeah, no, very true. Obviously, they did lose something, but I think bringing in Zurich Phelps is going to help a whole lot in filling that Radford loss there. And I'm excited to see this team play because they're one of the more fun teams to watch in the SEC. I would say right behind Alabama. But the one team I've wanted to talk about the most with you happens to be the team sitting at number 16 in the preseason AP poll. And that is those Arkansas Razorbacks. We got John Calipari, Coach Cal, going from Kentucky to Arkansas this year. And talk about a team that looks completely different. This Arkansas Razorback team only returned one player.
Yep.
On a 12 to 15 man roster, they returned one player. And then everyone else came from the portal or came in as freshmen, and they did a lot of work there. They brought in Jonell Davis from Florida Atlantic, Melo Sanchez from Hawaii Pacific, Jonas Adu went from Tennessee to Arkansas, and then brought in a trio of Kentucky guys that are following Coach Cal, DJ Wagner, Edu Fierro, and then Avicic. And then they brought in some beasts from the freshman side, Boogie Flan, Carter Knox, and Billy Richmond. And I don't know if you watched that Arkansas-Kansas exhibition game, Connor, but this Arkansas team looked good. Looked really good, and specifically Boogie Flan looked really good. I think he dropped 22 points on the evening. Really efficient, got to the line, got to his spots. honestly, this team, from what I saw against Kansas, they could be in contention and will be in contention for the SEC title this year.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to discount Calipari. I know people are like, "Oh, it's his first year." Every single player is a freshman or a transfer outside of Trevon Brazile that stayed. But Janelle Davis, he 18 points per game at FAU. He's a good player. Obviously, we talked about Tennessee losing Adu. Um, coming from Tennessee, obviously 11 points per game score, but coming from Tennessee, we know, he knows what to do on defense. And then obviously DJ Wagner coming over from Kentucky, he already knows Calipari's system, which honestly I think was a pretty big get for Calipari, bringing in one of his old players from Kentucky. But yeah, no, I'm pretty excited about this team. I'm interested to see how their season goes. Um, it's weird seeing Calipari not at Kentucky. But yeah, no, I'm excited. I think they have a lot of interesting pieces here. Interested just to kind of see like how their offense looks and how the defense looks just throughout the season, just because, just so many transfers. It's just like, oh, is this team actually going to consistently play this well, or is this kind of like a one-off kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, first game playing against Kansas and beating them 85-69 looked great. I will say Hunter Dickinson didn't play in that game, so that could change a whole lot. But yeah, Boogie Flan looked great. And then another one I want to highlight, DJ Wagner. So if you remember, he was a highly touted freshman coming into Kentucky last season. Did not have the season everyone was expecting. I mean, he was talked about being a lottery pick, maybe even top 5 type of player, and didn't even, get drafted or wasn't going to get drafted, which is why he remained in college. Followed Calipari to Kentucky, and in that preseason game, he looked great as well. I think DJ Wagner is going to have that big step that we see from freshman to sophomore season, and that could really push this team forward. The one thing about Arkansas is they just got a lot of pieces, and I think these pieces are going to fit together and fit together well. And I'm excited to see, we're going to see a spot where it's like, can Coach Cal actually coach? Because I feel like we've gotten to this thing where it's like he just gets good players. And yeah, he's got good players this season, but I mean, it's a whole new roster. Like, you have to be able to coach for this team to succeed. And so we're going to see that this season. I think they're a scary team, and I would not want to face them in the SEC this year. So I'm excited to see the Razorbacks and see what Coach Cal can do for them.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely probably a team, some of these other SEC teams might see in the tournament, and you're like, oh, I actually really don't want to play them. Especially it's probably a conference you're going to have a lot of bubble teams on. I know we'll probably touch on a few briefly here in a second. There's definitely some bubble teams, when you kind of get down that stretch and then in the conference tournament and you need to win those games, Arkansas is probably going to be a team where you're like, oh, hey, what if we don't play them? So.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a very interesting thing to see, but Arkansas has a lot of talent, and sometimes that helps a lot. So next 4 teams, we're just going to quickly run through them that are ranked for the SEC. We got Texas at 19, Florida at 21, Kentucky at 23, and Ole Miss at 24. Cool to see Texas moving over from the Big 12 this season. We knew they were going to be still rated pretty highly, but I don't know.
Team.
I think they might struggle a little bit. The 2 I want to talk about the most, and we'll just quickly touch on them, Kentucky and Ole Miss. Kentucky, I mean, this is going to be a whole new look team. I think it's going to be new for the Kentucky fans. They're used to, Coach Cal getting all these one-and-done freshmen, new team every single season. I don't think that's what we're going to see anymore with Mark Pope moving over there, but I think this fan base is really excited for Pope. Obviously, won the championship in Kentucky when he was there earlier on, but I think it's gonna be an exciting season for Kentucky. I think they might struggle though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously Mark Pope, phenomenal coach. This is so they actually have none or no one from the previous roster, is returning, I believe. This is like all transfers and freshmen.
Mhm.
So, I think just like we said with Arkansas, I think they're gonna obviously Arkansas look good against Kansas, but Kentucky's gonna have to figure out, who is going to play, how much people are gonna play. Pope is gonna have to figure out his rotations. But the good news is in college basketball, which unlike in college football, it's okay to lose a few games at the beginning of the season. If you figure it out, 10 games into the season, you're in a good spot,
For
Um,
sure.
so, but obviously, like we said, Mark Pope, good coach. I think he will figure it out. And, by the end of the season, or at least halfway, I think they'll probably have a solid rotation. And, I mean, they'll definitely probably be competing in SEC.
Yeah, for sure. And then with Ole Miss, obviously Chris Beard, just a well-coached team. He has kind of had that program on the right trajectory the past couple of seasons since he's been there. So I actually think Ole Miss is going to be pretty good this season. So they should finish in, I would think, the top half of the SEC. But again, 9 teams ranked. It's kind of a lot. So we'll see for them. But I'll quickly ask Connor, who do you think is going to win this conference, and think maybe he's going to make a run in the NCAA tournament?
I am actually going to say Arkansas, dude. I like them. I think Calipari has a good thing cooking up there. I kind of like them winning the conference.
I like Arkansas. They're actually going to be my number 2, but I got to go with Alabama. I know I'm being very vanilla going Kansas and Alabama, but there's a reason they're the number 1 and number 2 team in the nation. It's hard to get away from Bama on this one. Just the absolute firepower they have on the offensive end is going to be incredible, and it's going to be a sight to see. So give me Alabama, but I like the Arkansas pick as well. All right, moving on to the Big Ten. There's not as many teams ranked in these next couple of conferences, so we'll go through these pretty quick. For the Big Ten, we only have 4 teams ranked, and those teams are Purdue, Indiana, UCLA, and Rutgers. For Purdue, their big question and what we're looking at this season is, what are you going to do now that you don't have a 7'4" monster in the middle in Zach Edey? And I think the biggest thing for them is, can these guards take that next step? We saw them take a step from freshman to sophomore year, that being Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer. Can they take that step going into their junior season? And that's going to be really what it looks like. Do I think they can take that step? Yes. But I don't think that's going to translate into a really far run in the NCAA tournament. I don't think without Zach Edey, this team has a whole lot going for them. But I do think Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer are going to be playing really well this season.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if I have a whole lot to add. I think they're going to have to rely on their guards more. But, I will say they did bring in Daniel Jacobson, another 7-foot center. Not sure if he'll play, but they do have another 7-footer on their roster to continue Matt Painter's obsession with 7-foot centers. So, yeah.
I don't know if he's going to be playing this season, but you already know Matt Painter's going to have him right in the next couple of years. Good to note, in their preseason exhibitions, they lost to Creighton 93-87, but then beat up on a Grand Valley State team 99-41. So this team can score. And then another thing is, I think we're going to see the emergence of Trey Kaufman-Wren. He was the backup center to Zach Edey last season, sometimes played alongside him. So it's really going to be those 3 guys and then kind of the pieces around them. We're going to need to see some guys step up for the Purdue Boilermakers this season. We also have, as I mentioned, Indiana, who had one of the best transfer classes as well, right there alongside Kansas. They brought in a lot. So they brought in Miles Rice from Washington State, Umar Ballo from Arizona, and Kanan Carlisle from Stanford. I think this team brought in a lot. The biggest question I have for them is, can they shoot? They brought in, that was kind of their struggle last season. They didn't have a whole lot of shooting. They have like Malik Renew and Mackenzie Mbako, which are both double-digit scorers, but not the best shooters. But then you bring in Miles Rice and Umar Ballo, who Umar Ballo can't shoot to save his life. Miles Rice, he's all right. Maybe gets a little better. And Kanan Carlisle's a little better as well. But I just don't know if they have the shooting on this roster.
Yeah, I feel like we see this a lot in college basketball. Teams just seemingly can't shoot. Um, I know McKenzie. I feel was he not supposed to be a shooter coming into college? If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on that. But obviously struggled last year. He shot 32%. Honestly, he just kind of struggled shooting in general last year. Only 39.5% just in general. So yeah, I don't know. I think I can kind of see him being someone who maybe is going to take a step forward in their shooting. But I mean, I'm kind of right there with you. What is their shooting going to look like? I feel like that was something we saw with Duke for a few years. They for some reason just did not have a consistent shooter, and it showed. They struggled down the stretch in games because they just had no one who could hit the three. So when you factor that in, and these tight games, and they need a three, who is Indiana kind of turn to?
Yeah, for sure. I think, basically all of their projected starting lineup is like low 30s in shooting from three, which, is all right, but not necessarily the best. So I think that's going to be their biggest struggle. In their preseason exhibition, they beat Tennessee 66-62. So they might be a lower scoring team as well. But I think this is a pretty big year for Mike Woodson. What's it going to look like if he doesn't get it done? Because he's had a lot of talent. It hasn't produced much. So I think we might see Mike Woodson on the hot seat this season if it doesn't turn out to be what everyone's expecting it to be. And then, obviously, as I mentioned, we got UCLA and Rutgers. Both of them are ranked. Biggest things for them, for UCLA, got a lot of movement there, bringing in a lot of new people as well.
They brought in a lot of scorers, though.
They did. They brought in a lot of scoring. I mean, 5 transfers that were in the double-digit scoring last season to go along with 3 returners in double-digit scoring. So now it's just going to be finding those rotations. And then Rutgers, it's really the story. They got 2 of the best freshmen in the country in Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, but who can go alongside that and, supplement it as well.
Yeah. I will say, sorry, I'm going to go back for 1 second at Eric Daly on UCLA from Oklahoma State. Pains me just a little seeing our boy there. But obviously a lot of movement at Oklahoma State too. I think Rutgers, though, I will say, I think they're ranked for a reason. Obviously bringing in Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper too, number 4 player. Obviously, I think this team has high expectations. I think whether they can actually meet those expectations is going to be a little different story.
Very true. Very true. All right. Who do you think's winning this conference?
I feel like this one might be a little easier to predict, but I think I might have to go with UCLA.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think obviously they're returning a couple key pieces, but obviously they're bringing in just so much scoring. I'm expecting some high-scoring games from this team.
Hey, I like that. I don't want to go Purdue because they're the highest-ranked team, and it's just like back to back to back. So you know what? Give me Indiana. Let's make it a little interesting. I think they brought in enough talent. The biggest question is, can they glue? And you know what? I think, yes, I got confident in Mike Woodson this season because if not, his job might be on the line. So give me Indiana to win the Big Ten this season. But we're going to keep it moving going on to the ACC. I feel like we really got 2 teams to talk about in the ACC. We got Duke. We got North Carolina. We kind of know the stories between both, but I'll set it up a little bit. So Duke, you got in the biggest name in college athletics, college basketball for sure, in Cooper Flagg. Comparing him with a few other very notable freshmen and Con Knipple, and then also having, I think it's Kalaman Malouch, or can't really pronounce his name, but it's something like that. Big center from South Sudan. They have looked very well, pairing them with Tyrese Proctor and a lot of the older veterans on Duke. John Shire just knows how to recruit, man. I mean, it doesn't matter who he's going up against. I feel like Duke is in the prediction for maybe getting a player. They're getting him, and that's because John Shire. This team looks so good. I think this team looks so good, and they're going to be really good this season.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about their older, guys on the roster real quick, Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster. I think a lot, is going to rely on them, not necessarily for scoring, but just for leadership, especially Tyrese Proctor. Tyrese Proctor was someone that I think he reclassified, if I'm not mistaken, too, as well. Like he was playing at 17. He was someone they were expecting not to be at Duke a long time. Obviously, in his third, fourth year, and he's still there. Just seemingly hasn't taken the leap I think they have been expecting him to. But I wonder how much of that was maybe having Jeremy Roach in the picture. As much as I like Roach, that definitely could have been a hindrance to Tyrese Proctor. But in terms of leadership, it's Tyrese Proctor. Jeremy Roach is gone. Pretty much, Kyle Filipowski's gone. Ryan Young is gone. Like you are this team's veteran. You've been in the system the longest. You know what to do. Obviously, I think Cooper Flagg is going to draw all the attention from opposing defenses. But I think it's up to Tyrese Proctor to be the cool head on this team.
For sure. And this team can absolutely score. They have played 2 preseason games this for exhibitions, and they're averaging 105 points per game. I will say the first one was against Lincoln, Pennsylvania, which is a D2 school there, where they beat them 107-56. But the next game is the more surprising result. They played Arizona State and beat them 103-47. Let me remind the viewers, Arizona State receiving votes to be in the top 25. They have a pair of 5-star freshmen as well. And Duke absolutely obliterated them. And the scariest part about that game, Connor, it really wasn't because of Cooper Flagg. It wasn't because of Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg had 9 points in the game, played well, but struggled a little bit shooting, only going 3 for 9. But I think the freshman that needs to get a little more talking about is Con Knipple. This guy is an absolute flamethrower. And honestly, such a great dynamic duo with Cooper Flagg. And then I love what you mentioned about Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster. Just 2 very good veteran presence. I think Tyrese Proctor is going to make that next step. And the thing is he doesn't even have to make that big of a step because of everyone that's surrounding him. And it's like you get hit with these freshmen alongside these vets, and then you got even more vets coming off the bench. It is a sight to see. 6 players in that preseason game against Arizona State scored in double figures, and then you also had Cooper at 9, Common at Maluch at 8, and then Isaiah Evans at 5, and Spencer Hubbard at 2. I mean, this team looks really good, and I'm excited to see what they got going this season.
And we haven't even talked about their transfers yet. Obviously, I don't think they'll be like the focal points, but I mean, these guys are gonna be their role players. They're gonna be filling in, if people get injured, and they don't have, obviously they didn't get the biggest names in the transfer portal, obviously because they had, so many good freshmen coming in, but they have some pretty good transfers coming in. I'm not sure if you want to touch on them at all.
Yeah, we'll quickly go through them as well. So we have Sion James from Tulane, Malik Brown from Syracuse, Cameron Sheffield from Rice, and Mason Gillis from Purdue. I think the biggest ones are obviously going to be Sion James and Malik Brown. And then Mason Gillis, he is just a good veteran presence, whether he plays a ton or not. I mean, this guy is played for Purdue, played in, a national championship game, has won conference championships, played alongside Zach Edey. So he's played alongside great players, and he can stretch the floor and shoot it from 3 as well. This team is able to come at you in so many different ways. They're really scary this year. And then the other team we got to talk about in the ACC is obviously their rival, the North Carolina Tar Heels. So they lose Armando Bacot finally. Feels like he was there for 10 to 20 years, like a Perry Ellis, Kansas thing going on there. But obviously they bring back RJ Davis, one of the preseason All-American and maybe Player of the Year nominations, alongside Elliot Cadeau, Seth Trimble, and then bring in some big-name transfers in Cade Tyson and Vin Allen Lubin, as well as incoming freshmen of Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. North Carolina just gets dudes, and when you got RJ Davis on your team, you know you're going to be at least a pretty good team. I think the big question is can these support players playing alongside RJ Davis really make that next step? And when RJ Davis might not be having the best game, or he's getting double, who can take that step and be the next guy up?
Yeah. North Carolina, I think, is really interesting because obviously Duke has gone the one and done route. Obviously, North Carolina has had some of those guys, but they kind of are like their guys stay 3 to 4 years, and they develop them. But one player I really like is Elliot Cadeau.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously only 7 points per game last year. I think he's mostly like a defensive guy, but he had a couple moments last year where he showed his potential, especially from the outside. Only 18% from three last year on the year, but kind of improved as the year went on. But what I would like to see from him is just improvement shooting, because guys were literally guarding him at the free throw line, because they knew he either wasn't going to shoot it or he was kind of brick it. I think in the tournament he finally started hitting a few threes. But I think he's going to be a big part of maybe getting RJ Davis some more space, just because, they didn't have to worry about Elliot Cadeau when they were sharing the floor. They just help off of him just because they knew he wasn't going to hit a three. So I think he might be a pretty big piece for them if he can take that step.
Yeah. Another one I want to mention, Seth Trimble. I think that's going to be kind of their three-headed monster in terms of the backcourt with RJ Davis, Elliot Cadeau, and Seth Trimble. Seth Trimble's looked really good in exhibition games. Actually dropped 33 in their exhibition against Memphis. So he's looking good. And I like what you said about Elliot Cadeau. I think this season he's going to shoot a lot better from three. You could tell just from his Twitter and Instagram that he's been practicing it and getting
hard
ready
to shoot worse than 18%.
Exactly. So I think he's going to be somewhat at least competent from there, and people are going to have to respect it. And then I think the big name from the transfer side is Cade Tyson. He looked great at Belmont last season, averaging 16 points per game and 6 rebounds. He's going to need to play really well from them because he's kind of a bigger player and being 6'7". They're a little weak at the front court section, in my opinion. So I think that's going to be their biggest struggle is who can, step up from a front court side of things and really help this team out there.
Yeah. Obviously, I feel like we just have to mention him because he's the number 7 recruit from this class. But Ian Jackson, he's listed as a small forward, but he's only listed at 6'4". I'm kind of interested to see what kind of role this guy has on the team.
Yeah, I think he's going to play a big role. I don't know if he's necessarily going to start or come off the bench. I think it might be a 6-man situation, but we'll have to see on that one. But he's a great player and one of the premier prospects coming out of high school. So obviously he's going to be able to make a name for himself. I just don't know if he necessarily has that same star power that you see on the other side of the ACC with Cooper Flagg, obviously.
Yeah, no. But I don't know. I'm still definitely expecting this team to compete. It's UNC, and Hubert Davis is a pretty good coach, I would say. He's done good since taking over this program. But I will say I think these two teams are probably far and wide above the rest of the ACC, which is kind of crazy to say, I feel like.
For sure. Yeah. We with the ACC, there are only those two teams ranked. Everyone else is outside the top 25. I think the other notable ones are going to be Wake Forest, Miami, and Louisville. But when it comes down to winning the conference, in my mind, it's between Duke or UNC. So, Connor, which one are you going to go with?
I'm going with Duke, which, I don't know, probably going to get flamed for jumping on the hype train. But, it's kind of hard not to pick them. Obviously, like we said, we only have two options here. I think it'll be a pretty close race between these two teams. Obviously, we know when these two teams play each other, it's usually a close game, no matter what their records are. But I kind of like the star power on Duke, and I like Tyrese Proctor filling in that mentor or that senior level role.
Yeah, give me Duke as well. I don't think it's much of a question, to be honest. I think North Carolina is going to be good. I think Duke is going to be next level. I really like this Duke team. So give me Duke, and who knows? Duke might win the Natty. I think they're that good. All right. Well, I think we're going to move on to the Big East, and we got some of the top dogs being UConn, Creighton, and Marquette. UConn coming off a back-to-back national championship. So the big question with them is, can they three-peat? Connor, give me your thoughts on the UConn Huskies this season.
I mean, I think it's going to be pretty hard for them to repeat. Obviously they are losing a lot. So it's going to be, I mean, I'm not even going to do the math on what, on their scoring loss. But that being said, I think no one was expecting them a couple years ago to win the national championship. But Dan Hurley obviously knows what he's doing. They brought in the number 9 recruit. They brought in Aiden Mahani from St. Mary's, 14 points per game scorer. Obviously returning a 13 point per game scorer as well in Caravan. So I don't know. I'm kind of expecting them to maybe become like a Gonzaga, how it seems like we think, oh, okay, like all their good players are left, but then they get their guys through this system and it's like, oh, there's more players stepping up. I'm kind of interested and kind of expecting that's what like them to be. So I'm sure they're probably going to be fine.
Yeah. I mean, losing 4 starters is obviously going to be a big loss, but they're going to be fine. It's Dan Hurley. He has been the best coach in America the past 2 seasons, and I don't think that's stopping anytime soon. Liam McNeely, the number 9 recruit, he played alongside Cooper Flagg at Montverde Academy. Great player, a big commit for UConn. I think UConn is going to be just fine. Alex Caravan, obviously the lone starter returning. And he could have been drafted this year in the first round, to be honest, but he decided to come back and go for that three-peat. I think Hassan Diarra and Samson Johnson are going to be kind of those next men up, like you were mentioning, as players that have been developing in this system for the UConn Huskies, as well as Solomon Ball, Solo Ball, some people call him. He's going to look great. And then Aiden Mahaney was just a beast at St. Mary's the past 2 seasons. A big part that St. Mary's has beat Gonzaga because of Aiden Mahaney, so he's going to look great as well. I like what Dan Hurley has done, and Dan Hurley's the type of guy, he's not going to go out and get the best recruits. He's going to go out and get the recruits that fit his system well, and I think he did just that. So UConn's going to be just fine. They're going to be really good and definitely have a shot at winning the Big East this season.
Yep.
Next team we got is the Creighton Blue Jays. Love me some Doug McDermott in the Creighton Blue Jays. They're currently ranked at 15th in the preseason AP poll, and for good reason. They are bringing back their star center and Ryan Kalkbrenner alongside of the starting point guard Stephen Ashworth and their starting 4-man Mason Miller. Brought in a big transfer in Pop Isaacs coming over from Texas Tech, as well as Jemiah Neal from Arizona State. Their loss, though, is definitely on the offensive side of things with both Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander going in the draft. So had some big losses, but also brought in some big players. I like what I see from Creighton this year. Just don't know if they're going to have enough to recoup what they lost.
Yeah, I mean, definitely going to be difficult, especially with a player like Baylor Shireman. Obviously we know him for his scoring, but he also was he was a tall scorer, if that makes sense. Obviously they brought in Pop Isaacs. Pop Isaacs is maybe 6 foot. I'm not even sure if he's that tall. I'm not sure what he's listed at, but definitely not a Baylor Shireman type player. Also, I think, like you said, they brought their point guard back. That's where Pop Isaacs played. Interested to see how they handle that situation. But I will say, Kalkbrenner, their center, really good. Definitely last year, multiple times went toe-to-toe with some of the other best centers, in college basketball. Obviously, averaged just 17 points a game. He's a pretty good defender. He can grab some rebounds when you need him.
Scary shot blocker.
Yes, terrifying. But honestly, I'm expecting them to definitely finish. I think they'll finish in the top 2 in the Big East. I mean, Greg McDermott, obviously, his at least in the past 10 years, he's been a good coach. I'm going to go back past 15 years. He's been a good coach. Um, just always seems to be a program that replaces their scoring. Not necessarily they're going to have those like star player names like you do with Cooper Flag, but obviously you have Baylor Shireman. Obviously you had Greg McDermott's son play for him, years ago, and obviously a tremendous college scorer there when he was there. So I feel like he always just has some type of score on his team. It's just going to be a little interesting where that's going to come on the wing this year.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, Creighton beat Purdue in their charity exhibition in the preseason so far. But if we're looking at the box score from that, we had 3 dudes in double digits. It was Pop Isaacs with 24, Stephen Ashworth with 16, and Kalkbrenner with 18. So, those are the big 3. It's really who else is going to step up. I think that's the biggest question. But when you have those 3 as your big 3, you're still going to be in pretty good shape. So I like what you said. I think Creighton's definitely going to be in the top 2, maybe just top 3 of the Big East, but is primed for another big season. And then the last team we got in the Big East we want to talk about is Marquette. Marquette didn't do a whole lot. They kind of lost Tyler Kolek and Oso Igudara to the NBA. Didn't bring in a lot in, but I think they're just looking at their roster. They were really deep last season. I think what their thought is, let's just keep who we got and let them have a bigger role. Maybe shrink our rotation a little bit and have a bigger role. I think that's going to be very beneficial for the likes of Cam Jones. He already averaged 17 points last game, but without his running mate last season, Tyler Kolek, this guy could go for 20 plus this year.
Yeah, no, I really like Cam Jones. Definitely going to be an interesting team. I think, like you said, they got minutes to a lot of guys last year, but no transfers coming in. Highest recruit they brought in was Demarius Owens at number 81. So obviously not a whole lot of freshmen that are probably going to play a whole lot. But with that being said, anything can happen in the Big East. It seems like. Obviously, I think to me Marquette is a step below these other 2 teams that we've talked about. But I think they'll definitely be up there competing for a top 3 spot.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. All right, the only other ones I have as notable mentions for the Big East are St. John's. Obviously, you got Rick Pitino. He's got them playing really well, and I think they're going to look good this season as well. And Xavier. But for me, I think winning the conference, I got to go with Dan Hurley and UConn. They are just too good, too solid. Love their offensive sets. I got to go with UConn on this one. What about you, Connor?
I'm going to go against you again. I know we agreed finally on the last one, but I'm going Creighton, man. I like them. I don't know. I think they brought in some scoring. I think obviously they'll have to figure out their rotations, and when it really gets down to close games, who is going to be their go-to guy. But I like them. I like Kalkbrenner. I think he's a phenomenal player. And I'm interested to see if there's anyone in this conference who can really compete with him down low. So.
Yep, I like that. All right, well, last team we want to touch on today is obviously the only non-Power 5 team in college basketball that's ranked, and that is the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Gonzaga has had a lot of movement this year. The biggest notable one is Anton Watson leaving, but then just about everyone else is returning, and they're also getting people back from injury, and I think Mark Few has a squad this season. I'm very high on Gonzaga, which is why we're going to be talking about them for just a brief moment. So bring back the big man, Graham EK. Nolan Hickman's back. Ryan Nimhard's back. Braden Huff's back. Ben Gregg's back. Stushy Stromer. Those were all a big part of the rotation last season. They get Steel Venters back from injury. He's been out the past 2 seasons with injury, but reminder, when he was out at Eastern Washington in 2022-23 season, he averaged 15 points per game. And then they bring in just a good duo of transfers in Michael Ajayi from Pepperdine and Khalif Battle from Arkansas. They also brought in Braden Smith from Colgate, but he's rumored to be redshirting this season and ready to go next season as well. I think this team is deep, and obviously I think they're going to win the WCC, but The reason I want to talk about them is, Connor, I think they might be able to make noise in the NCAA tournament.
I mean, that's the expectation every single year for Gonzaga. I know I talked about them earlier, how it's like every time we think, oh, okay, their players are gone, they retool. Contrast to that, this year, they're bringing back pretty much everyone, that contributed. The only one they really lost, Anton Watson, at 14.5 points per game. But then you look at it, they already have 4 players over 12 points per game returning, and then you're factoring Michael Ajayi and Khalif Battle coming in, both pretty much 15 points and higher scoring right there. So obviously, I think scoring, has never really been an issue for Gonzaga historically. I'm assuming it's probably going to be pretty similar. We know they're going to score a lot of points, but I think the big thing is, can they get over the hump? And that is, when it comes to the tournament, can they actually win it all? Obviously, they've come close a few times, but can never just seem to really, close it out, especially recent. I don't know. I feel like they have a tendency to fizzle out in either the round of 32 or Sweet 16. But who knows? We'll see. Maybe it's their year finally.
All right, I'm going to make a bold prediction for you, Connor. Okay. This first one's not that bold, but I'll get to it. So this season, Gonzaga is going to tie Michigan State's streak of 25 straight NCAA tournament appearances. I think that one you can kind of write in the record book already. They're going to tie it at 25, okay?
Really?
They are going to make it to their 10th straight Sweet 16. Made it from 2015 to 2024. They're making it to the Sweet 16 in 2025. And I'll make this one even hotter for you. Ready for it? Gonzaga will be in the Final Four in 2025. I like the way the Gonzaga Bulldogs roster has shaped up. Obviously, we'll have to see how the way that looks in this upcoming season and what it has looked like. But as of right now, if I was making my bracket, Gonzaga would be in the Final Four.
Yeah. Who knows? We'll see. I mean, they got a few tough games early on in their schedule, which, I mean, I don't want to spoil their opener because we're going to talk about that in like 2 seconds. But, I mean, they're playing Kentucky. They're playing UConn. They're playing UCLA pretty early on in their schedule. Obviously, that last, when they start playing in their conference, gets pretty easy outside of St. Mary's every now and then.
Yep. That's the one thing I'll say about Mark Few is, he understands that the WCC is not the strongest, which is a big reason why they're moving over to the Pac-12. But he's not scared to schedule those tough games at the beginning of the season.
Non-conference schedule.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to talk about. For real quick, we're going to talk about the 5 games of the week. We have on opening night, Monday, November 4th, the day that you're listening to this, hopefully, we have number 8 Baylor versus number 6 Gonzaga in Washington. Not in Spokane, so it's not in Gonzaga's home arena. I think it's out actually in Seattle, just due to, the amount of people that are wanting to go to this game. Connor, I say we quickly go through, pick each of these games. Let me know who you got in this one.
I'm going Gonzaga. I know we talked about Baylor. Well, obviously we talked about both of these teams, but I just kind of like them returning most of their players. Obviously Baylor has a little bit to figure out.
All right. Now, this is going to surprise you, okay? But I got to pick this one or else my wife might be a little mad at me. So, Gonzaga, Baylor. I like Gonzaga, but I'm going to go with Baylor on this one. I think Baylor, Scott Drew, they're going to start out strong. They're going to win this one. But I think Gonzaga is definitely going to be in this game. It's going to be a close one. Really fun to watch. That's at 10:30 p.m. Central Time. So if you're a night owl, maybe you'll stay up and watch it. I know I will be. But I think this can be a really fun game to watch, so you don't want to miss out. Next one we got also on opening night, number 19 Texas versus Ohio State. No, we didn't touch base too much on these teams, but it's one of the bigger matchups we have on opening night, so I thought it'd be fun to include. I'll go ahead and go first on this one, Connor. I actually am going to pick Ohio State. Jake Diebler last year was the interim coach. This offseason got hired on as the full-time head coach for Ohio State, brought in some really nice transfers. I think he's going to make a name for himself this season, and I think they start off with a big win against Texas.
Well, I was right there with you. I know we didn't talk about Ohio State, but I think they have a pretty good team. They have some good transfers. We didn't really do a deep dive on Texas. I know we might have mentioned them, but they're a team that has a lot to figure out as well. Their team kind of got decimated during this offseason. But I was, Ohio State.
All right, then we got later in the week, Friday, November 8th, North Carolina, number 9 versus the number 1 team in the nation, Kansas Jayhawks. Connor, you going Big 12 or you going ACC on this one?
I'm going Big 12. I'm not sure it's partially not the personally, like I'm not a North Carolina fan. Obviously, pretty high on them as I talked about, but it's so hard for me to root for North Carolina. So sticking with number 1 Kansas.
All right, I'm right there with you. Just don't think North Carolina, excuse me, has the front court to go up against Hunter Dickinson. I think him and KJ Adams are going to feast in this one. So give me Kansas. And then our last 2 games both happened on Saturday, November 9th. We've already talked about this team once, but we got the number 8 Baylor Bears going up against Arkansas, number 16 team. Talk about a tough schedule that Scott Drew has given himself the first week of the season, playing against Gonzaga and Arkansas in back-to-back games. I'll go first on this one. Again, got to go with the Baylor Bears. They're playing in Dallas. Baylor Bears are going to show out. I think Arkansas is also going to show out, so it should be a high-flying game and very fun to watch. Another close one, but I think Scott Drew's team starts out 2-0 on the season.
Well, me and your wife might not be friends after this, but I'm going Arkansas. I don't know. I mean, we talked about them. They've looked good in their exhibition games. I think they can build off of that. So I'm going with John Calipari and the Razorbacks.
All right, last game, also on the November 9th, we got number 11 Auburn going up against number 4 team in the nation, the Houston Cougars. Connor, last one. Who do you have?
This is pretty quick for me. I'm going Houston. I think top down, they're the better team. I think Auburn's a big question mark for a lot of people. But I will say, I think they definitely have a chance to make it close and a good chance.
I like what you said right there. I'm right there with you. Houston, just the better team, and I think they're going to be able to maybe run away with this one. I think their defense is going to stifle Auburn, and to start off in the early of this season, I don't know if Auburn's offense is going to be ready for that. So give me the Houston Cougars. All right. Well, I think that wraps up today's show. No, it was a lengthy one, but we know college basketball is back, so we got to go through, talk about everything, talk about our preview of what to expect in this season of college basketball. If you like what you heard, make sure to give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. Go ahead and give us a 5-star rating on any podcast platform. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a comment. We'd love to see him as well. But again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Courtside. Peace.
Peace.